In this lesson, I'm going to continue on from where I left off. I painted the albedo map for the top bun, and now it's time to export this into Maya and test it out, and also use it to draft a subsurface scattering result. Usually, you can do some nice tricks with your albedo map or your base color map to get some good subsurface scattering results. But if the results don't look good, then I'll come back and paint a unique subsurface scattering map. But I doubt that'll be the case. I think I can generate some really good subsurface scattering results with what I have. So let me get started with this export so I can go deal with the albedo and subsurface scattering. So I'm just going to go File, Export Textures, and I'll just use the default template, just clear everything out and export just color. This is the only thing I care about, the color right there. And I'm going to export it for all UDIMs. So I'll save that to File, and I'll come back in Maya so we can load it in. Here we are in Maya. I am going to hide the rest of the elements. I'm not going to use a layer. I'll just select these and just hide them. I just want to focus on the bun. I'm going to open my Hypershade, select this piece of geometry for the bun, find its material, select it, and map it. Hit Tab and type File to load in a file texture node. I'll name it accordingly, File. That's how you like to name it, Top Bun Base Color. And I will load it in. So there it is, open. I'll make sure that the UV tiling is set to UDIM, and make sure that the color space is sRGB. This is more often than not the choice you'd be picking for base color maps or maps that impact color. I'm going to turn off filter type so I get no paring down of the texture. And I'm going to pipe this into base color. And it looks like it registered. And now it's time to take a look at what it looks like. I'm going to open the Arnold renderer. Yeah, I'll leave it on my look dev camera. These are the initial results. It does look a little redder. I did expect that. I knew the whole time that I was shading. I have a more yellowish theme for my reference, and this looks a lot redder. That's not a tough thing to resolve, but for now, I'm going to focus on cranking down my roughness map. I just want a flat roughness. So actually I'll crank it up so I can just see the pure color. One of the first things I'm going to do is give a little bit more illumination. In the last lesson, or I think one of the other lessons, I did mention that I put an area light in front here to help illuminate the front side of this thing a lot more because it's fairly dark. I'm going to increase the exposure of that light to a higher number, just so it illuminates more and I can see what's happening. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this render and I'm going to wire in base color map into my subsurface scattering. This is just an initial thing I'm going to do, but I might end up using a node. I just want to see what it looks like. So I'm going to pipe this color into subsurface color. I'm going to store this so I can make a comparison. Let me check to make sure that that subsurface scattering is on. Yeah, the weight is 0, so I'm going to set it to 1. It's going to slow down the render some. And I'm going to go with the type of random walk 2. I like this solution. It produces a much better result for me. So I'm going to pick random walk 2. And for now, I'm going to hold off on radius and scale. For now, I'm just going to stick with the default result. And just so I can see a faster result, I should probably render just a small section. But you know what? No, I'll just let the whole thing render and I'll come back and take a look at it. And I'll be able to make an assessment of how I should proceed. Okay, so these are the results, the completed render. I'm going to store this. I really like it. It's really cool. If you remember, I did have a handful of HDRIs and I want to be able to do some renders under all of them to see what this thing looks like. But before I do that, I'm going to put a color correct node in between my base color map and my subsurface scattering. So I'm going to stop this because in the future or shortly, if I want to make some alterations, that's the best way. So I'm going to go color correct, and I'm looking for AI color correct. That's Arnold's color correct node. Yeah, right there. I'm going to put this in the input and make sure that my out color goes into subsurface scattering. And this is just so that I can play around with these values if I need to alter the impact that the base color is having on subsurface scattering. Right now, I am not going to do too much of anything, but I do think that if I do come back to do anything, it might be to reduce saturation. At least that's what I think, or potentially also add some exposure. But right now, I like the result I have. So I'm going to play around with these HDRIs. Remember, I have so many of them. And right now, the one that's active is number 7. This Lauter Waterfall HDRI, I think it's that one right there. Yeah. So I'm going to dial through the rest of them and just see what my end result looks like. I'm going to come over here and start with number 1, I suppose. So I'll come over here and switch the index to, actually no, I'll just start with whatever is in 0. So one of the first noticeable issues is how the parts of the albedo map that are not as dark are feeding values to the subsurface scattering that is causing those regions to be completely washed out. This is an expected result with subsurface scattering. It's going to wash everything out as it tries to achieve that translucent feel. One initial solution is to pipe the albedo map into the radius parameter. It is a real issue. With a value of pure white, which is what the default is, the albedo map is having a more difficult time controlling the subsurface scattering of those regions. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the render without the albedo map connected to the radius and with it. So it does a lot of controlling of the washed out effect. And this is good. This is a good starting point. I like this. I also did a render of it from the bottom view because I wanted to see how the crevices were looking, right? I just wanted to make sure that they were dark enough, and they seem to be working. I think I do have to get my roughness map in here to make a final assessment about what I want to do, but I do have an idea that might require me to create a unique map for scale. The scale controls, multiplies with radius value to control how much subsurface scattering there is. But I'm not going to make that decision until I get my roughness map in here. So with roughness, I want to make sure that the innards or the crumbs have a 0 roughness, like the lowest possible roughness, because they look best that way. It looks more like crumbs. It doesn't have that much specularity, close to none, so I don't want any here. But the shell will have a significant amount. So this is me setting the roughness to 0, the highest, for a glossy effect to see what kind of effect I'll get. I definitely don't want something like this, but 0.5 lets me gauge what kind of roughness I would want for this crust and the singe. I'm not going to make them the same. There'll be some variance in the roughness value of the singe and the shell, but we'll go into substance matrix shortly and I'll deal with that. Another issue that I have to resolve is that there are some paint issues here. Like a region like this really should be dark. So this is a fairly simple thing to fix. I just have to go back and do some better painting in these regions so I get better blending. All right, so let me go craft a roughness map and come back and I'll be able to make better decisions about how to proceed, whether or not I need some additional information to pipe into subsurface scattering to get some different results. Okay, so we're back in substance. I'm going to fix that singe issue first. So I'm going to the singe and I'll actually go to material because I want to see those edges that were a little exposed. I think this is it right there. And yeah, I could use a little bit of a darker value. Let me find the second tier of darkness. I think that's it. I'll go to the paint and Yeah, start filling this in just to get some darkness here. And if I see any more of them, initially I had planned to kind of leave them a lot more exposed. And I can also use this one too. It's a little bit of a lighter color. Yeah, I did. I think I'm also going to use my smooth and normals brush to get better blending. I don't want to make them completely dark because there's a reason why I left gaps. It's just those gaps need to be slightly more darker than the darkest. Now it's time to create this roughness map. There's a way in which a Substance Painter encourages you to create your roughness map. It has something to do with being on the roughness layer, and so that it can pipe it into the right map. I don't particularly care for that approach, only because I have an approach that works fine. I just like to do all the maps here because ultimately sometimes I need maps that Substance Painter doesn't have a slot for. The simple way to do it is just to do it here in another folder, export it as the base color map, and just rename the maps. If you do care a lot about seeing what the roughness looks like here before you send it to your DCC of choice, then it's best to do it the right way and make roughness modifications on the roughness layer stack. All right, let me get going. So to create my roughness map, all I'm going to do is just duplicate this layer with Control D, hide my original, make sure to call this roughness. And I'm going to step through, turn all these off. There's some of them I need, some of them that I don't need. So I'm going to start from the bottom. All right, so this is the lowermost layer. This is my multicolor spray layer. I don't really think I'm going to need it for this. So I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to start with this layer. Actually, I'm going to start with a layer beneath this one. So I'm going to create a new fill layer, and this fill layer will represent the crumbs. So I'm going to make sure I isolate by mesh names and make sure I hit Alt to select the crumbs. And then I'll do the same thing with the shell. So I'm gonna represent the shell and I'm gonna do the shell and the singe together. And then as I step up the stack, they'll have eventually inherit their unique colors. For now, let me just isolate this to their respective meshes that need it. So these two. And for the crumbs, I'm going to first just isolate color, hit Alt and click color to isolate it. And I did say that I wanted a very high roughness. So I want something upwards in this vicinity. Like I'm going to start with a 0.8. And for the shell, I'm going to go with something in the 0.5 region. So I'm going to come down to a 0.4 something. So this is just the base. And then now it's time to step up and come to like this large scale base detail. I'm basically going to use most of the paint data that I created, but I'm just going to strip it of its color and make sure I'm picking values that sit within the value range that I want. So for this red in color here, I'm going to check it and I'm going to strip it of its color, and about 0.5. It's not bad, it's okay. So I'll go through and come here. And as long as I get a nice variance, I want a nice varied map. Usually it doesn't matter, you could take a flat map like this, roughness map like this, and it'll be fine. But the more time you spend giving it some interest, it will echo into the final render. So for the crumbs, I'm going to do the same thing. Grab this and push, and it looks like this looks like a pretty high value, higher than my base, which is fine. And then I'm going to move up to the aocentric shading, and this is probably one of the more interesting maps. I'm going to grab it push it. Just bring it down a little bit so I get some variance. I'll do the same for the shell. Drag it here and give it a little bit of some interest by pulling it down. Make sure it's all the way. Just want a black and white map. And then next is the shell. All these colors are great. I'm gonna move all of them into the grayscale range and make sure that I'm sticking with values that are going to give me a nice glossier feel on the shell. I'll turn on the flakes. That's also unique to the shell. And bring these values a lot lower. All right, so now this large scale blotting detail, this might also be of good use. So I'll take it and take it to an even lower value. And get some really nice shininess in those areas. And the last and very important, the singe. So I'm going to go into the singe layer, and all these are also going to stay in the darker vicinity, so we get some glossy roughness or glossiness instead of a very rough look with diffused highlights. I want to be careful to get not to get something too glossy. This is going to be fairly glossy. And also on the parts of it that extend to the crumb, I do want it to have the same properties as the shell and the singe. So it stands out from the very rough crumbs, like that. All right, so this is a good starting roughness map, although I feel like these values, I want to bring them up a little bit. They're a little too far from the shell or the crust, and I don't like that. So I'm going to find, yeah, this is particularly dark. I'm going to bring it up a little bit. That's a nice little transition. And I really should take it and test it, but one more thing I'm going to trust myself to change is to go just a little bit tighter with this base color. And ultimately, I'm going to see what it looks like in Arnold, and I'll come back and make some choices. I might want to turn some of these off based off of what results I get. Like these shell forms, I feel like they're all interesting. So I should give them a chance. I'm going to bring them down just a little bit. Some higher contrast results. Yeah, like that. Okay, so this is my roughness map that I want to get started with. So I'm going to push it out as a base color map and then rename it as roughness. And I'll come back in Maya and apply it and see what the overall result looks like with our current base color and subsurface scattering. So I'm going to go File, Export Textures. I'm going to put it in a unique folder, call it Roughness Bake. And really, all I want is the base color because it's in the base color stack. So I'll export that. And here in Maya, I'm going to load it in For now, I did create another unique color correct node for the subsurface radius. As I mentioned, right now, these two are utilizing my base color map as is, but they might be modified, or I might create unique maps for them based off of what I see after inspection. But for now, they're just utilizing the base color map. So let me get this roughness in here. I'm going to hit tab, go file, load in texture, call it file, top bun roughness. I'm going to load it from file. Now I've been a little sloppy with my naming of the files since I brought in this color map. So I'm going to do a proper naming. These are my color maps. And the one that I loaded in my base color map, I'm going to change the name because it looks a little too messy. So I just need it to be top bun base color. I'm going to strip away all that and reload it in. So this is just top bun base color, and that's the third one. Yeah. And then my roughness map I put in a separate folder. I'm going to do the same thing to it, but and I'll just copy it into my main folder, my main project folder, and then load it in to Maya. So I'll just select the first one. There it is, top bun roughness, and open it. Make sure it's set to UDIM. It says it found 3 files. Now it's very important here that I set this to raw. That's how you deal with non-color maps, specifically roughness. Almost everything that doesn't affect color is going to use raw. That doesn't impact color. So basically your utility maps and stuff. And I'm going to also turn off quadratic because I don't want any paring down of the texture. And then I do have one more setting that I have to turn on. Alpha is luminance. This is a setting that you are supposed to turn on, and even substance documentation recommends it. But yeah, when you have a roughness map, you do want to turn on alpha is luminance. All right, so I'm going to grab this roughness map and pipe it into the specular roughness color. And that should be it. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I did set a few keyframes to make this asset rotate so that I could render all parts of it in the light source that I have placed in the front. So I don't have to go create light sources all around it just to see what's happening behind it. So I just move in the timeline and render. I'm going to go back to 0 and start doing some renders. And I'm going to come back with a handful of rendered results so we can have a discussion about what we're seeing. One thing I forgot to do is push out the new base color because I did fix the edges, so I'm going to push that out too. So I'll push that out and update the file so Maya can get the new file. I just want to come back to let you guys know that I'm going to push out new albedo map. So now that I have the new file names, it can't find the albedo map, so I'm just going to make it find it by matching the name. I can go back on disk, but I can just do this too. And it's found 3 files, so we're good. All right, I need to come back because I did make a mistake. I wired out color into specular color. This is completely wrong. I'm looking for just one of these channels. Because it's a black and white map, it's the same in all these channels. I just need to wire that to roughness. This should not be impacted, at least not with the approach we're using. I'm not playing with specular color. Let me return that back to its value of white. I'm not going to be touching specular color at all. I'm going to leave it white unless I absolutely need to, if I feel like it needs its unique map. But right now I'm just going with like a simple setup. So this roughness, just one channel into specular roughness, and I'll go back to rendering. All right, so here are the renders with the new roughness map that was just plugged in. There are a lot of changes I want to make. The first change, well, there are a lot of changes I want to make, and there's some things I want to experiment with because there's some results I'm seeing that I don't particularly like. The first thing is that the singe color might be too dark. even if I decided to go with this dark of a color, I would have to tone down how glossy the roughness map is over there, because it's really dark, which isn't how the singe appears in my reference. It's not as specky. One of the two solutions, either brighten the singe color, which I have to do anyway because it just feels too dark, or increase the roughness value, which takes away the glossiness. So I'm going to go into substance and actually do both of those things because I do think I need to. The second thing I want to do is I actually do want to create a unique map for subsurface color. It's going to be a lot simpler. Well, actually, I want two maps. I want a subsurface color map, which I can plug into subsurface color and subsurface radius, a very simpler map. And then I want to be able to control the subsurface effect. I want more charge of it, specifically so I can make the occluded areas of this crumb stand out more. And I think I can do that with the radius. I don't mind the not occluded areas, or the areas that are not holes, being very translucent or having high SSS. But when it gets into those holes, I do want a little bit more of a not so subsurface look. So I'm going to go create two maps in Substance to control these. One for subsurface color and subsurface radius, and another for the scale value that works in conjunction with subsurface radius. It's pretty much this value here, this scale value. It multiplies itself by this radius value. And the other thing I want to do, which requires me to go back to ZBrush, is concerning this shell. Based off of my reference, I don't feel like I'm getting, this feels a little more muffin-like. There's a lot of moundy detail. And in the reference, there's, all my bun reference is a lot more, I have a lot more planar detail. It's a lot flatter detail. So I might have gone a little bit too far with the secondary forms. So I do need some type of a clay polish on a lower subdivision level to get more faceted or more planar underlying surface, right? I don't mind the small bits of detail on the surface, but the secondary forms and below, it just needs to be a lot flatter. And that is also the case here. I think that's how I'll close this lesson. I'll go into ZBrush and flatten it. And then I'll push the finalizing of the bun to the next lesson because there's some additional things I want to do, but I want to do these things first. All right, so I'm going to start by going into Substance and dealing with this singe color. Come over here and grab my singe and go to these values and increase them a bit so I lose that very dark feel for them. This one might be fine. I need to focus on the really dark ones. When it comes to a PBR, you do want to be careful about how far you go down. There's a limit to how dark you should make your base colors. The darkest value should not go past a certain point. I'm pretty sure I might have passed that point. I was aware when I was doing it, but I thought it wouldn't be that much of a problem. When it comes to brighter values, you have a little bit more cushion. You can stop around somewhere here. But I think with darker colors, there's a particular value that's recommended that you have to be above. All right, so I think that should be enough. Then the next thing I'm going to do is go to the roughness map. And as I said, this roughness might have been too high for this singe. So I'm going to, and if that's the case, it means it's also a little too high for this. Unified a bit with the shell by increasing the value a bit. Up there. Okay, this one, go a little higher, make it a little bit more rougher. dark, very dark rim. Take it up a bit. Yeah, so that's a lot closer to the crust. And also might want to go to this and increase it a little bit. There's not that much of a difference, contrast between the roughness of at the transition point. It blends in a lot better. And ultimately I can keep changing it as I inspect. So those are the two changes I want to make to the base color and the roughness. The next thing I want to do is create that color map for my SSS. So the unique color map. I'm going to do that by duplicating my base color. I'm going to call this SSS color. And I'm going to go with something significantly simpler. So a lot of these these varying values I'm going to turn off and just end up with a not so noisy map for subsurface color. This particular change for the subsurface maps is experimental. So I just don't like I want to push too much color information into the subsurface. If it doesn't work, I'll just resort to what I have, because what I have is not bad. It just feels a little busy, and I don't particularly like that. So I took away the flakes. Let me take away the secondary forms. And okay, let me go down to a very simple multicolor map from ZBrush. And let me see the aocentric shading. Yeah, I'll take that out too. And the large scale blotting. Could lose that too. A lot simpler. But I do want to flatten it a little bit more. But there's a lot less color information, which I like. For the singe, I'm going to be very careful. Since this is going to feed into subsurface color, too bright, when the values are too bright, they will increase the intensity of the subsurface scattering, and I don't really want too much of it on this shell. Actually, this shell does need to come down as far as the value is concerned. So let me start with here. Subsurface should be about same that this is, but I'll start here and start creating darker values so that it's not feeding too much. This is a base color map, so I can go fairly dark. Make sure it's not feeding bright colors to the singe, or a majority of it, like that. And then I'm going to come here, add a fill layer, and I'll make sure it's isolated to the shell. And then I'll pick, isolate the color by hitting Alt. You just want this to impact color. And I'll pick a value in this vicinity. Might want to saturate it a bit. Yeah, there's not that much SSS on the shell, and not too much here too. And definitely not too much on the singe. Now this is going to make for a lot of SSS because this is a high value, and that's kind of what I want. But this is a simple enough map for for SSS color and radius. Let me take this and let me tone it down just a little bit, not too much, but about there. So this is a good map to experiment with. And then the other map I want to create is a black and white map for scale, subsurface scale. So for that one, I'm going to create a fill. I'm going to group this and call it SSS scale. One thing I am going to need is my aocentric shading. specifically for the crumbs. Let me duplicate that and dump it in here. Leave it off for now. This is going to be the crumb SSS scale. And for that, I do want a value of 1. So I'm going to leave it as is. Then I'm going to, but I'll make sure that I'll isolate it to the crumbs. I'm going to create another fill layer. Let me make sure the SSS color is off. Create another fill layer. This will be the shell and singe scale. And this one, a good value that seems to work in Maya when I experiment is 0.1. So I'm going to bring it down to here. Scale of 0.12 is fine. And this will be isolated to the top one and the singe. Okay. But then another place that I want to have 0.1 is in the occluded area of the crumbs. So I'm going to lose this shell. I don't particularly care about the shell's scale. I just have one value for it, but I do care about this, the crumb. And ultimately I just want my original, I think in my fill layer here, I have a grayscale value that is my AO map. And that's pretty much what I want. All this extra stuff, I think I could turn it off. And actually, I think the levels must stay on because the levels inverts and picks the occluded areas. I want to make sure that that is the case. Yeah, these are the occluded areas. Let me turn on material and make sure that is the case. No, I might be wrong. All these digs in here are not darker. Well, because this node is doing the inverting, I think. Let me pick a darker color so I can see what's going on. I want to lose this black and white spots. Go back to base color. Yeah, this is the occluded area. Okay, levels intensifies it. That's good. So this is what I'm actually looking for. So I just turn off the black and white spots because that was not needed, and this inversion is important. Yeah, because it's making the recessed areas darker. Let me confirm that. Yeah, the recessed areas are darker. So this would be my scale map. And let me make sure it's also at that, it's at 0.3. That's not bad. It's a good place to start. So I'll see what these maps generate for me in Maya. See if I should proceed with them. Okay, these are the maps. I'm going to push them out. And then I'm going to go into ZBrush and make those changes and assemble everything in Maya. I'll be back in ZBrush. Okay, so here I am in ZBrush. I'm going to focus my attention on this top bun and see what I can do to get the look I want. I'm going to hide all the stuff. And focus my attention on this shell. That's really what I care about. Now I'm not going to replace what I have, but I am going to create a duplicate of it. So I'm going to duplicate this, called top shell, more planar, secondary forms. I'm going to hide this and crank this all the way up and see what my detail looks like. Okay. The problem is the secondary forms being too pronounced. So I'm going to go to a material that's going to push, showcase more cavity, or push, show more of the detail. Yeah. And I don't want to, what I'm more than likely going to do with this is run a clay polish operation, but I don't want to do it on subdivision level 7. And I probably don't want to do it on 6 either. So I'm going to go lower. Let me start over here and see if I can flatten it over here. See what happens. So I'm going to go to geometry. I'm looking for an aggressive clay polish, or a handful of them. So I'm going to go, yeah, clay polish does give that flattening. So this clay polish at the default values does it, but let me go up to the higher subdivision levels and see if I've preserved, how much of my detail is preserved out there. How much of my granular detail specifically. Yeah, the granular detail is still there. And I do have like a flatter, planar feel. I wonder if it's going to be enough, whether I should push even more to get more planar results. Let me look at it under different materials. Yeah, this polyskin material never fails. And just to try, I'm gonna go one more and run another clay polish. Yeah, that's really aggressive now. Go to the top. This is good, but I think maybe I need to go even lower, to a lower subdivision level, maybe one step lower, because I just want to compare the two to see which gives me the result I want. So for this one, I went to subdivision level 5 and run 2 clay polishes to get that planar feel. I'm going to create another copy. Call this one 2 clay pol on sub P5. That's a really long description. Do this again, duplicate. Hide this, and this time I'm going to do it on 4. I'm going to come to 4 and go to geometry and run a clay polish. Yeah, that's really flat. Let me go to the higher subdivision level. Yeah, this loses a lot more lumpiness. Let me compare both of them. Let me hide one, both of one. Okay, so yeah, this one, because I did at a lower subdivision level, it preserves a lot more of the surface detail than this one. This one eradicates most of it. So this might be what I would experiment with. Let me grab this name and just use it to name this one. And I only did one, so I did 1 clay polish on sub D4. Right, and I think this is the one I'm going to take. And we'll see if it does already feel a lot more planar surfacing. But you know what, I think I'm going to even do one more experiment. I don't think I need this one. This one obliterated the detail. So on sub D5, I don't think I want this result. I prefer this one. And if there's a second one that's going to go, let me delete this one. I don't particularly care for it. But if there's a second one that's going to go, I'm going to duplicate this and attempt the clay polish on sub D3 this time. Go to geometry and do a clay polish. Yeah, that is very flat. That took all that lumpiness away. So this one sub D3, if I go higher, yeah, then all the surface detail is still preserved. All that granular detail is still preserved. So this one is also really good. So these are the two I will experiment with. Let me rename this one. This one is one clay polish on sub D3. Okay. So I'm going to push these two maps out. I only need to push normal and displacement for this shell and this one. And then I'll go into, I'll store them. I'll store what I have right now and test these two out and see if it improves the look of this shell. All right, so I'm going to go into my Z plugin and go to my multi-map exporter. Yeah, and I'm just going to use the same settings I use for normal and displacement. If you want to see those settings, definitely check out that lesson. It's about a few lessons ago that I used for exporting my displacement and normal. I don't want to spend this lesson going over it again, but yeah, I'm going to push these two out and I'll be back. So I'm going to review all the changes that I've made. The first thing was I changed the color. So for the color, I went with a lighter singe value. And then I went to the roughness and I modified the roughness, made it so that the shell and the singe are less glossier. So these are the three maps for that. And then I did a SSS color, which is a unique and simpler subsurface option. This is fairly saturated. I'm pretty sure I might use the color correct node to desaturate it a bit, but we'll see what the results are. And then I have an SSS scale, which is just a black and white map. And then these black and white maps, they're called linear maps. So the non-linear maps are the ones that affect color, and these simple black and white ones are the linear ones that will more than likely use raw and alpha's luminance options. Right? And the point of this one was to make sure that the SSS is more intense on the crumb area, but the occluded areas of the crumb is a lot less. And then also the SSS is less on the shell and the singe, not so much. But this is just really experimental. I'm going to see how it turns out. I might end up increasing these values to make it lighter for the shell, the singe, and this occluded area. But we'll see what it looks like. And then two normal and displacement options for the bun. This was with sub D with clay polish run on subdivision level 3, and the other one is with clay polish run on subdivision level 4. All right, so what I'm going to do is store my original normal and displacement for the top bun for Udin tile 1, because that's my original and I don't want to lose it just in case I don't like these results. All right, so that would be top bun displace tile 1 and top bun normal tile 1. So these are my original. I'm going to put them in a folder. Call it top bun normal displace original. So let me make sure the name is consistent with yeah, it's normal dis. So I have both of them stored in there. And the first one I'm going to try is the one for where I did the clay polish in subdivision level 3. So I'm going to take those two files and replace what's in this folder. Now, one thing I used to like to do back in the day until I figured out the proper way to do this was just to make sure that Maya picks up the new file. I'll just delete this TX file that Arnold creates. So I'll just grab this, and this would force Arnold to say there's no TX file, so I have to regenerate it, because at that time I didn't know you could flush the texture cache in Maya and force it to reload the file. So I would go ahead and delete these two files. Well, this is telling me that it can't do it because the file is in use in Maya, but that's fine. I would have shut off Maya and then deleted them. The proper way to do it is to go into Arnold and under the flush caches, textures, if you flush textures here, it will force Arnold to reload all the textures. So I'll just do it now. I'll just flush cast textures. All right, so here's the new shading network setup. I have my SSS color, which I brought in as sRGB, turned filter off, and just treating it like something that's going to impact color. And it's going into 2 color correct nodes, and each color correct node one goes into subsurface color, the other goes into subsurface radius. This allows me to make modifications to either of them if they need to be changed. Maybe if I need to desaturate or saturate or do any one of these operations, these color corrections, to alter how it's impacting color or radius. This is my SSS scale, which is now fed into the scale value here. This is my black and white map. This is treated like any other linear map. It's raw. I turn filtering off and I turn alpha's luminance on. And everything else should be the same. My normal and displacement setup are all the same. Displacement should be in here. Where's the map? Yeah, that's my displacement. It's in there. So I'm going to come back with the renders, and I'll close the lesson with an analysis of my result and continue this finalizing of the top bun materials in the next lesson. But I'll come back with the renders. Here are my render results. I have some good results, some not so good results. I'm going to start with the not so good results. So first, the subsurface color experimentation, I did not like at all. It does not look good at all. The first thing I tried to do when it didn't work was to desaturate it. So it's too yellow. Like, I knew I was gonna have to desaturate it, but those results aren't appealing either. The albedo map servicing the SSS colors works way better than this. Here's the super saturated version, using it without any desaturation. And here is it with the albedo map plugged back into it. And all I really did, I do want to show this, is that I used the color correct node and I just set saturation to 0.5. So I tried to desaturate it and it failed. So anyway, that's it with that experimentation. I don't particularly care for it, so I'm gonna discard it. I'm back to using base color. It feeds into the color correct node, which for now has no changes, and both of those feed into the subsurface color and subsurface radius. Now the scale, on the other hand, the SSS scale is working really well. It's doing what I expected it to do. If you look here, look at the crumbs. The occluded areas are a lot darker now, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want them to be washed out. If I compare it to the original looks a lot more washed out. And this one, the detail is back in there. So the scale seems to be working. The scale map seems to be working, so I'll leave that alone. Another thing that I don't particularly like is the singe. It's a lot lighter now, but it still feels really specky. I do have to be very careful about how low I go with the roughness, right? It gets very glossy, and ultimately it's going to have to be maybe a little bit lower than I expect, because this is a dark color and I don't want this high contrast singe. It's just not something I see in my reference. So I'll definitely be going back in Substance and playing with that. But somehow from a distance, it seems to work. It's not as aggressive. No, it does feel a little specky, but it's not as aggressive. But I think I'll still modify it. Now, the other thing that I'm starting to notice that I don't like is this consistent yellow feel to the entire crumb. I don't really see that in my reference, or the reference that I'm using. Let me show you. Most of the reference that I look at for my crumbs, there's some variation as you get to the center, and there's less saturation. It's a lot wider. The yellowish feel stays at the edges where the singe is predominant. I want that kind of effect. So I do want to add a little bit of gradation so that this core here is a lot wider, or a lot less saturated yellow. That's not too hard to do. So I'll just go in there and tack on some color data with a good brush that keeps this central core here a lot wider. As far as the shell is concerned, I have lost that lumpiness that makes it look like a bear claw. This is what it was before. So I have this really muffin-like bear claw feel. And because of those clay polishes, it has given it that planar feel, which is good. So it's lost that planar feel, and it's heading in the right direction. So this lesson has gone pretty long. I don't like to make these lessons so long now. I used to go the 2 to 3 hours and stuff. I think I want to stop this here. So I'll continue all this troubleshooting in the next lesson. Another thing I want to do is something I'm seeing in the reference that I use for the backside. And it's this also gradation in color. Gradation is always good, right? And it's a lot lighter at the closer to the edge and a lot darker at the top. It's something I tried to do while I was coloring, but it turns out I need to push it a lot farther. And it's a really good look. It makes it look really nice. It's not so much in the front, but I might end up putting it in the front to make it look interesting. But I do see it in a lot of my reference, even with some of these buns. The ones that look particularly good do have it, right? Something like this. This is a very nice feel. Gradation always makes things look cool. So I will probably darken the top a bit and lighten the edges. So that's it for this lesson. Next lesson, I'll finish this. I'll bring it to a close. Another thing which I had planned to do in this lesson, which I didn't have time to do, is to take my flakes from Substance Painter to ZBrush and get the lumps in the correct place. Like if you look at a reference, a lot of these flakes, when you go really close, these flakes that I put in Substance Painter, they are sort of swollen or have this risen feel. It definitely has to go in the highest subdivision level. I don't want to create any more lumpiness that I just got rid of, but I just want some consistency with where the flakes have been placed on the color map, and I just want that to propagate into the normal and displacement map. So yeah, something like this, wherever there are flakes, I would like to see some of that lumpiness or the extrusion, right? Pick very strategic areas. I might not use all of the flakes that I did, but I'll just take some key ones into ZBrush and use it to sculpt. It's a very simple process. So anyway, that's it for this lesson. These are the current render results, and I'm satisfied with them, except for all the changes I have to make. So in the next lesson, I'll work on all the changes I've discussed, and I'll probably also need to see what these things look like with different HDRIs. And I'm also sure that after taking a look at it before the next lesson, I'll come back with fresh eyes and I'll have a whole bunch of other things that I might want to do. But ultimately, I will conclude the shading of this top bun in the next lesson, so I can move to painting the cucumbers and the sauce. See you in the next lesson.